It was June 762 BC. The largest city in the world. A guy walks into town covered in fish guts. Pretty stinky. He'd been in there, the fish guts, for 3 days. Maybe you know the guy. His name's Jonah. He walks into Nineveh and he basically says 40 days and Nineveh is destroyed. The largest city in the world at that time. 40 days and it's going to be destroyed. Days later, they see that in the sky. They see a total, actually that's not a total solar eclipse, but they saw a total solar eclipse. Total solar eclipse is actually where it actually gets dark during the middle of the day. Now, about 7 years ago, we had one that passed close here, but we weren't in the sphere of totality. In the sphere of totality, it literally gets dark. Animals begin to think that it's night. It's really quite kind of freaky. The last one went clear across the United States. My parents' ranch in southeastern Wyoming was in the dead center of it. They actually had 120 people there from NASA, and they were filming, and they did a whole, I think it was National Geographic or History Channel, did a whole thing on it. Pretty amazing. Getting dark. God used the eclipse in 762 BC to affirm Jonah's dire prophecy, to wake up the city of Nineveh. And what happened was the city of Nineveh was so shocked, so like, whoa, that everybody wore sackcloth, and they even put sackcloth, which is like burlap, on the cattle. They basically said, God, don't do this. Don't do this. We're scared because of that. Now, here's the thing. God uses this. Now, there have been 12,000 eclipses in the last 6,000 years. So eclipses are not unusual. But total eclipses are very rare. In fact, total eclipses only cover about 50 miles, a 50-mile swath of the earth, and then it just goes for however long that eclipse is. Revelation 6:12, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. God prophesies multiple times in the scriptures about either the moon becoming like blood, which is a lunar eclipse, or the sun becoming dark like sackcloth, which is a total solar eclipse. Now, fascinating, we have one that's going to cross the United States in a month. What could that mean? Well, it could just be it's just another eclipse, no big deal. But it could mean something else. That's what we're going to talk about today, because God has a calendar. God's calendar is interesting because Genesis 1:14, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and it was so. It says, let them be for signs and for seasons. Interesting. It's not just that the earth, the sun and the moon, they tell us the seasons, it's fall and winter and summer, all those things. Not just that, there would be signs. Literally, these eclipses would be signs that something is about to happen, or God's trying to get our attention. Our calendar that we use today is a solar calendar. And our solar calendar basically is one trip around the sun, all right? And the problem is our calendar is not quite perfect, and that's why what happened this week? We had a leap day, right? Leap day, February 29th. If you were born on anybody born on February 29th here? They're a fourth as old as everybody else, right? Because they age a lot slower. That's the most rare birthday, obviously, February 29th. That we add that because the trip around the sun is 365.25 days. So we have to add that day every 4 years. And but it's a weird calculation because then we don't do it on the century years, and we do it on some century years, but not all century years. It's crazy because, well, it's a solar calendar. Now, the Hebrew calendar is a luni solar calendar, all right? And I'm not trying to be facetious, but it's basically based on the moon and the sun. Okay, so we add a day every 4 years. They add a month every 2 to 3 years. And they're not quite sure when that month is coming, okay? And so it is a little bit loony, okay? But the loony solar calendar is based on the moon, on how long it takes the moon, the cycles of the moon, which is 29 and a half days, and then the sun. And so they balance the two. Well, fascinating here. That the moon, you look at the moon here, and it's about the size of the sun, right? Somebody like, yeah. Yes. No. Well, it's actually, what's fascinating is the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but it's also 400 times closer to us than the sun is. So the result is it appears like it's the same size or nearly the same size. It fluctuates a little bit in and out, and so there are some times where you actually have this ring of fire, which is what the kind of eclipse that we have here. It's called an annular eclipse. I picked this because it was just a cooler picture, and that's what AI gave me. But basically, it just happens to be, if the moon was smaller, we wouldn't have an eclipse. In fact, a 99% eclipse hardly looks like an eclipse because the sun is still so bright. When you look at it, you really can't tell, okay? Unless you have the special glasses and so forth. And so the ancient Israelites and all those ancient peoples, they didn't have the special glasses. So they would only see the total eclipses or the annular eclipses where you see that ring of fire. But both of those would be a wake-up like, what's going on? Is there something here happening? Now, the other thing that's interesting, like I said, it's 400 times, right? And it says that it's for signs and for seasons. Well, how many of you know your Roman numerals? Let's just do a quick, okay, some of you think you're good. Okay, so let's just do a quick test. All right? Roman numerals. Next screen. X, what's that number? 10. No, it's an X. No, but that's the way the Romans, they didn't use the Arabic numbers that we did. They basically, each letter represented a number. So the X is 10. The V is? 5. The C is? 100. You're getting softer. Now, how many actually know what the D is? 3 of you. What is the D? 500. Okay? 500. Now, here's what's fascinating. Hebrew, the tav, which is the word for sign or mark, is 400. Now, how big was that moon? How did Moses know that the moon was 400 times closer than the sun? God put it into the Bible. God put it in. He said, I'm just putting little things along the way that you're not going to find out for centuries, for millennia, that God put there to show you that this Bible has his fingerprints all over it. The 400, so that tav was how they expressed the number 400. And the modern Hebrew, it's kind of like if you want to think of modern Hebrew, like the modern font for Hebrew, which is more of squarish, that's the letter tav up there at the top. In ancient Hebrew, what they call Paleo Hebrew, it looks more like an X or a cross. It's funny that the mark, if it said that the mark of God was upon them, they were making the mark of the cross on them, the tav, okay? So, okay, that's interesting, but so what does that have to do with anything? Well, we have, like we said, we have solar eclipses and we have lunar eclipses. The lunar eclipses, I'm going to go really fast through these. But because of the way the Jewish calendar works, most of the feast dates are on, and remember, it's a lunar calendar, so that it's based on the full moon or the new moon. The full moon is when the moon is at its peak, and it's the fullest, and most of the feasts are on the full moon. For example, Passover is on the full moon. Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, is on the full moon. Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets, or the New Year, is on the new moon, okay? The new moon, and the new moon you couldn't see. It's basically when the moon was behind, it was blocked out, so there was no light shining on it from our perspective, so we didn't see it. So when they saw the first sliver of it, they would call that the new moon, right? So it's not surprising then that you'd have blood moons or lunar eclipses on feast days. It happens. But to have 4 in a row on feast days only happens every hundred or several hundred years. Fascinating that the last couple feast date moons that were the blood moons, May 14th, 1948, Israel was born as a nation. Then we had 4 successive blood moons that followed. June 5th, 1967. Anybody know what happened? 6-day war where Israel regains control of the Temple Mount for the first time in almost 2,000 years. Blood moon right before it, 3 blood moons right after it, all on feast days. Blood moon blood moons they happen all the time. But on feast days, they don't happen all the time. Then you have this, this is, for some of you, this be like a little bit confusing, but there's a thing called a Shemitah, okay? A Shemitah is a 7-year period. The word Shemitah actually means release. In other words, they were releasing the debts. They're canceling the debts on that 7th year. They were supposed to let the land lie fallow that 7th year, and God would bless them. God would give them enough in the 6th year to last for the 2 years that they needed. So that would be the Shemitah year. And then every 7 Shemitahs would be a year of Jubilee. Okay, so we have a 7-year cycle. We have a 7-day cycle. If you're familiar with the prophecies in Daniel, those were Shemitahs that it talks about. So the year of Jubilee would be the year after a 7 Shemitah cycle. Okay? Now, here's what's fascinating. So you had those 4 blood moons at the 6-day war, right? That began a Shemitah. That Shemitah ended with the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Okay, so the blood moons were kind of the warning. Here comes the war in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, and that began what was called a year of Jubilee. Remember, the year of Jubilee is a release year. It's a year when usually the land returns to the original owners. So what happened in ancient Israel, if you bought a piece of land, it was yours until the year of Jubilee. So you would pay a price based on how many years you could farm it until the year of Jubilee. Then you had to give it back. Interesting. What happened in the year of Jubilee? Israel regains the land. The land is starting to come back. Now, fascinating. So this year of Jubilee began with the Yom Kippur War. Do you know when that year of Jubilee cycle ended? Does anybody know? October 7th, 2023. Does anybody know what happened on October 7th, 2023? Oh, that's when Hamas attacked Israel. So the last day, okay, this Jubilee cycle, first year begins the Yom Kippur War. The last day, the very last day of that Jubilee cycle, Hamas attacks Israel. It's 50 years later. And what does Israel do? Goes in and begins to take possession back of that land of Gaza. Gaza, they basically turned it over, and it says, no, the land, it's a Jubilee year. They're getting that land back. On the very day. Who started that war? Israel didn't start that war. So, we got these blood moons. There were blood moons back in 2014, 2015. Everybody's like, oh, the rapture's going to happen. I missed it. Did you? I guess you did too. So, but those blood moons, you can see the dates. They were in April, October of 2014, April and September 2015, but they were on feast dates, and they were a warning. They were a warning. What happened after that time period? Fascinating. Since that time period, since that Shemitah, that wasn't a start of a Shemitah, but during that time period, what's happened? Well, we've had a little thing called COVID, where the world got shut down. That was kind of a wake-up call. That's interesting. Maybe it's tied, maybe it's not. But let's look at this total solar eclipse. So in 2017, there was a total solar eclipse that crossed through the United States. Okay, it started up in Bend, Oregon, went all the way down down through South Carolina, and like I said, total solar eclipse. That's 2017. Do you know what happened to the United States in 2017? We had the most damage ever from hurricanes, $300 billion. In case you forgot which hurricanes, Harvey, which dropped 9 trillion gallons of water, the most water ever dropped on the North America. And that happened 4 days after the eclipse. Irma, up until that time, was the strongest hurricane on record shortly after that eclipse. Also Maria, millions of dollars of damage and lives lost, all during that year, 2017. 2018, Trump and Jared Kushner began working on a peace plan for Israel, which included peace, P-I-E-C-E, for the Palestinians and a two-state solution. 2020, it was unveiled. In January 2020, it was finally unveiled. And in January 2020, COVID is starting to make its way all across. Not supposed to really mess with Israel. Let God deal with Israel. The Bible says in Zechariah that Jerusalem would be a stone of, a cup of trembling. And those that would try to mess with it would be in trouble. Interesting, too, in 2017, going back to that signs in the heavens, we did a message on the Revelation 12 sign. Fascinating passage, Revelation 12, that talks about, you can see on the screen, next screen. There, Revelation 12 says, there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child and cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And fascinating passage. Basically, the constellations at that time had the Virgin, Virgo, was with child. That child was this planet Jupiter, and Jupiter was in the womb area of Virgo for 42 weeks, which happens to be what? Gestation. A gestation period. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Jupiter's there and then comes out on September 23rd that day. At that same time, the only way, you couldn't have seen this by looking into the sky, but because of the technology that we have now today, where we can see where the planets are and we can see the stars and computer imaging, it actually, that verse was fulfilled. I believe it's not the only time it's fulfilled, but the time it was fulfilled prophetically with the constellations, in that there was, the moon was under her feet, and she was clothed with the sun. In other words, it happened during the daytime, but the moon was under, basically the alignment of all those planets and things happened to be exactly as recorded there in Revelation 12. Some of you are like, what? I don't understand. It's okay. There's a whole message on it. You can go back and check that out. But the point being is that there was another sign. It's another sign. There are these signs that are going on. Move forward to October 14th, 2023. There is an annular eclipse. Not annual, but annular. And annular is that eclipse that is a ring of fire. See the ring of fire on the next screen? That's pretty freaky. That gets your attention. Well, that eclipse went down the west coast of the United States, and that was, once again, an annular eclipse. It's like the full eclipse, except that the moon's just a little bit closer, so you can see the ring of fire around it. Then we have, coming up here, April 8th, 2024, we have the total eclipse that will have they estimate more than 30 million people will see this. This will be the largest total eclipse seen by anyone in the Western Hemisphere ever. Okay, 30 million people. It's going to begin down in Texas. So there was the annular eclipse there. It's going to begin down in Texas. It's going to go up, and then going to go up through Maine. Now, okay, big deal. It happens to be on Nisan 1. Okay, Nisan 1 is the first year. It's the first month of the Hebrew religious calendar. Okay, so that's when that eclipse is going to take place. That's also the day in the Hebrew calendar that they inaugurated the tabernacle, that Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire and died. It's also the day that they cleaned their houses and they were getting ready. It was actually the day that there began 3 days of darkness in Egypt when there were the plagues. It began on this day, on that same day in the Hebrew calendar. So that eclipse, fascinatingly enough, is going to go up through the United States. It's going to cross a little place called Little Egypt in southern Illinois, where there's the city of Cairo and Thebes and There are things that look like pyramids in that area. It's just kind of fascinating that it happens to be at that time. Now, one other thing that I want to highlight is that, remember the Hebrew letters on this next screen. The cross, right where those two meet, that's where Little Egypt is. Okay, so the eclipse, Little Egypt is one of the few places in the United States that will see the total eclipse both times. Okay, Little Egypt. Yeah, interesting. So let's just talk about our biblical Hebrew again for a second. Remember, what did the Tav look like? Oh, it looks like a cross. In other words, have you heard people say, leave your mark? That comes from the biblical term about leaving your cross, leaving your X. Remember, in older times when people couldn't sign their name, make your mark, make your X. I think God's made an X. He's left a mark. Now, that's interesting. That's the Tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew Bible. Now, where was the annular eclipse? Do you remember? There's the Hebrew, and that's the Tav. Now, so the annular eclipse, you can see it down here, is the bottom one. And what forms there is the Hebrew letter in the ancient Hebrew called the Aleph. The Aleph. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, right? So now we've got a mark on the United States that is the first letter of the alphabet, the Aleph, and the Tav, which is the last letter. Today we might, in Greek, we'd call it the Alpha and the Omega. Do you think we're marked for something? The question is, what are we marked for? Maybe we're just so good that God says, I love you and I want to put my name all over you. As a nation, right? Maybe as believers, yes, God has his hand upon us. God's going to be with us. But when we look at our world and what's going on, we lead the world in pornography. We lead the world in all the wickedness that God hates. God doesn't hate the people, but he hates the wickedness. Oh, and on this next screen, this on the left side, you see this is where all the earthquakes are in the United States, where the general earthquake activity. You've got the Cascadia down the west coast. You've got Yellowstone, which is a massive volcano. Then you got the New Madrid. I didn't know this until I was studying. The largest earthquakes in the United States, not including Alaska, the largest earthquakes in the United States have been in New Madrid, Missouri. Did you know that? In fact, in 1812, there was an earthquake that was so strong, it was almost 8 on the Richter scale, that the Mississippi River started flowing upstream. Okay? Now, and then notice there's a lot of earthquake there in the southern Appalachians and in eastern Tennessee, and then in Charleston. Now, what was the path of the thing that we saw? Next screen. It goes right along the earthquake stuff. LA got missed, but the rest of the earth, it's like it's making the mark. Just interesting. It's interesting. So now the other thing that happens on the same day as this eclipse, total eclipse, April 8th, there's going to be the planets align in a portion. Okay. Now, the people are like, oh, the planets are basically in a plane. Here's the sun, and they all revolve like this in a kind of like a pancake. And so they're always aligned, which is true. But the problem is they don't look like they're aligned unless they're in a quadrant. Okay. Unless they're in an area, in one area. They're only in a quadrant, in an individual area, about 7 times in the current millennium, and when they're in one quadrant. Now, what's going to happen actually on that day, the Earth is going to be on the other side of the sun, and all the and Mercury is going to be in front of us. Then all the other planets are going to be there, so that they're going to be in an alignment. Not like this. People think of it the planets aligning. They never align like this. Never. But they do align like this on the next screen. So, this is one in 2492. Okay, this is the next major alignment, and you can see here's the Earth. Here's the sun, and the planets are kind of all out here kind of in one area, in one quadrant. When you look in the sky that night, this is what it'll look like. And so they're all in a line, okay? But the day on the day that there's the total solar eclipse, when it's going to be dark enough that you'll actually be able to see during the day, see the planets, we happen to be, like I said, on the other side of the sun. I couldn't find a good picture of it, but basically it'll be similar to what you see there, except that it's going to be during the day instead of at night. Well, that's fascinating. For those of us that are going to be in this country that are facing the eclipse. Now, okay, big deal, eclipses happen. What does it mean? Oh, did I mention to you that the next solar eclipse on April 8th is going to pass through? It's going to pass through 7 cities named Nineveh. Look at this map. Here's all the places in the United States named Nineveh. Now look at the map of where the solar eclipse goes. That's interesting. Well, what does that mean, Ty? Well, we use lots of biblical names on our cities. I mean, people say that, that passed through 7 Salems on the last eclipse. And that's true, but there's 26 Salems. Jerusalem, think of Salem is the word for peace, shalom, okay? So that's not as significant as the fact that basically this next total eclipse is going to pass through all 7 of them, or within 90% totality. They're all in that swath called Nineveh. And Nineveh was for judgment. What I would say is, America, we need to repent. That's really what the message is. We need to repent. Are people going to listen? I don't know. Jonah didn't think they were going to listen. Actually, maybe that was the reason Jonah didn't want to go, is because he thought they might listen and that God would forgive them. But I'm praying for America to turn back, to recognize. The sun activity, one other thing I want to highlight, we are actually at a time when it's a peak solar cycle. The sun is on an 11-year solar cycle. We're approaching the peak. 2024 and 2025 are the peak of that. Here's our beautiful sun. This isn't quite the right distance, but it is to scale. There's the Earth. Here's how big we are. And here's when the sun does what's called it's basically like a burp, okay? It belches. When the sun belches, it's called a coronal mass ejection. And it's just this huge plasma and geomagnetic energy, like this gigantic power surge. And sometimes it can go as fast as 17 hours, and it'll be at the Earth. But it doesn't go the speed of light, okay, thankfully. But when it has these coronal mass ejections, they can cause radio blackout. They can cause the satellites to not work. They can cause your cell phone to not work. In 1859, one of these happened, the largest one ever recorded. On the next screen, anybody know what this is? Yeah, but this is what it looked like in Cuba. You're like, what? What happened was that coronal mass ejection caused so much geomagnetic stuff in the atmosphere that it looked like the northern lights were seen in Cuba in 1859. Did that get somebody's attention? That's interesting. Now, anything happen like in the 1860s? Oh, yeah. Wow. That's kind of a ominous sign. So, this coronal mass ejection during this time period in 1859 now at that time, the highest tech that we had was the telegraph. And the telegraph, they had it connected across the Atlantic, and there was so much energy that came through it that it caused fires. The telegraph wasn't on in some cases, but it caused fires because it energized the telegraph. Today, if this happened at that same magnitude, all electronics would be fried. This thing would be a brick never to come on again. But here's the thing. These lights would never come on again. Depending on how it hit and where it hit. It literally could wipe out the planet. I mean, it wouldn't wipe out the entire planet, but it's a matter of how it would affect. How strong would it be? How intense would it be? People ask, well, where is the United States in prophecy? Like, I read the Bible, and the United States is like the superpower. And so we should be in there somewhere. There's really only two places that we could be in Bible prophecy. We're either with our hands tied, something's going on, and we're either unable or unwilling to intervene in what's going on in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem will stand alone, and God alone will protect Israel. And so somehow we're not involved, either because, like I said, we don't want to get involved, or because we don't have the willpower to get involved. We're unable, our hands are tied, there's too much going on. Or the one I don't like to think about, but I have to think about as an option, is that the Bible considers us daughter of Babylon. I don't like this. I don't like this part of the message. But it is something to be warned of and beware of. Daughter of Babylon, well, it's talked about several times in the scriptures. Isaiah 47, Revelation 17 and 18. Isaiah 47, verse 1, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Your nakedness shall be uncovered, and your disgrace shall be seen. I will take vengeance. I will spare no one. Our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, is the Holy One of Israel. Sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called the mistress of the kingdoms. The chapter is all just, God is upset because of what Babylon, this daughter of Babylon. So it's not Babylon, it's the daughter of Babylon. It's somebody that's continued in the ways of Babylon, which is really what the United States has done. Notice it says go into darkness. That could just be an eclipse, but could that be a coronal mass ejection that wipes out the power grid? Do we have any bad actors that don't like us? Yeah. Probably the scariest thing is a nuclear bomb, if it were to go off in the atmosphere, because it doesn't necessarily wipe out the people, but it wipes out the same thing as a coronal mass ejection. It's called an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. And probably the greatest fear is that Putin in Russia, or Xi in China, or Yoon of Korea, North Korea, or Iran, or any of these guys, if they get one of these little bombs, they literally can wipe out, and they have to have the technology to detonate it at the right height. But basically, if they detonated it about between 200 and 600 miles above Kansas, it would wipe out all the electronics in the United States. One bomb, one country, nation that doesn't like us. That's kind of interesting. Now, we're headed into an election year. Not headed into, we are in an election year, okay? And here's the thing. During election years are the perfect time for other countries to pull the strings, right? I have, you know what? If China really wants Taiwan, October is the time to go. Because the United States will probably not have the willpower to do anything because, or Iran, or anything. I mean, we have this. We're literally on the cusp of war in the Middle East with the Straits of Hormuz and the pirates or the terrorists there. There's all this stuff. There's all this churning that's going on, and of course, Putin. There was a couple of weeks ago. There was discussion about NATO and NATO might move some troops that are closer to Ukraine, and Putin's you better not, and all this stuff going back. There's a lot going on. I'm not saying this to try to scare you. I'm saying this to kind of wake up and say, don't just keep drinking the Kool-Aid thinking that life's going to continue like it has for the last 50 years, and we're going to be good. COVID was a wake-up. COVID, people ask, was COVID a birth pang? I don't think it was a birth pain, but I do think it was the Braxton Hicks. Those of you that have had kids, the Braxton Hicks is the false labor pains that come, but they're telling you that you're pregnant and that something's going to come later. That's what COVID was. COVID was a plague across the whole world. When else in history has the whole world shut down? The Lord is saying, hey, when you see a sign that says bridge out, do you just keep going? They'll probably fix it by the time we get there. Revelation 18:4. God is speaking to the daughter of Babylon, and he's prophesying against her. And then he begins to speak to his people. He says in verse 4, "Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen. I'm no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day. Death and mourning and famine, and she'll be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her.'" In a single day. That kind of destruction in a single day. COVID, it didn't happen in a single day. It kind of evolved over months, right? A single day kind of destruction? Yeah, it could be an EMP. It could be some kind of cataclysmic thing that causes that area to be compromised. Proverbs 22:3 and 27:12, the exact same verse twice in your Bible. "The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." I think this is a time to be prudent. God may be calling you to be a Joseph who got the foreknowledge that there was 7 years of plenty now, getting ready for 7 years of famine, and so he set things aside. I believe we're finishing 7 years of plenty, and we could be heading into 7 years of famine. And so now's the time to be thinking that. Now, the Lord may be calling you to be an Elijah who lives by faith, and God is going to feed you by the ravens. That could be. But don't presume upon God that, well, I'm an Elijah. Well, maybe he's calling you to sacrifice now to be prepared and be a Joseph. Luke 21:25, "Then there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and there will be anguish on the earth among nations, bewildered by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and expectation of the things that are coming on the world, because of the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Think about that for a second. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. We think about, that must be the stars. Yeah, but it could also be all those little stars in the sky that we call satellites. If they were all shaken by some kind of CME, coronal mass ejection, and all of our satellites got messed up, and your cell phones didn't work anymore, that would be really annoying. And in fact, some people would be like, ah! Like some of you that had AT&T last week when you lost service. You're like, my phone's not working, my phone's not working, my phone's not working. Verse 27, "Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is near." This message, once again, is not to scare you, but to excite you that our redemption is near. And at the same time, be ready. Get ready, because we don't know. Well, I believe the rapture is going to happen. I'm going to be out here before it gets bad. You know what? The Israelites went through some of the plagues. They didn't go through all 10 of them. They were protected in the land of Goshen, but they had the flies. They had some of the plagues that they had to go through. There are some things that we may have to go through. Are you ready for that? Revelation 19:6, "And I heard, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, as the sound of many waters, and the sound of mighty thundering, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigns. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready. And to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints." The question is for you today, are you making yourself ready? Jesus is coming back. We don't know when. So Dave is more of the prophet in our ministry. I'm more of the non-prophet side, okay? because I handle the finances and stuff. Yeah, sorry. So, point being, I'm not saying something's going to happen this year. I'm just laying out a picture that this is what could happen. I'm saying, hey, be ready. I don't know. But you know what? With the things that could happen, I'm getting ready. I'm preparing. And the most thing, I'm trying to prepare my heart. Spiritually, that's what's most important. Are you making yourself spiritually ready for the Lord's return? Do you know that when you die, you're going to heaven? Or you just kind of hope that my good outweighs the bad? If you're in that place where the good outweighs the bad, God says he will judge you by the 10 Commandments and you'll be found guilty. But if he judges you by the Son, S-O-N, and you say, Father, I am not perfect. I am sinful. Not just not perfect, I am sinful. But I believe Jesus died for me. And I'm trusting in him to pay for my penalty. If that's where you are, then you can walk in confidence. You can walk in freedom. You don't have to worry about the end times because God is with you. But if you're worried about the end times, you got to look at your heart. Why are you worried? Are you not right with God? And are you preparing for what may be a bumpy ride? You know, like I said, some people think that we're going to be out of here before the tribulation. Some people don't recognize for the last 2,000 years, Christians have been persecuted. There's more persecutions of Christians around the world now than ever before. Pastor Dave and I, we believe that we're going to go through part of the tribulation period. We could be wrong. I hope we're wrong. But if we're not wrong, we're going to go through. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And I believe if the scriptures talk about the beast system, the Antichrist, and all that fun stuff, and that he'll set up a one world government of some sort, and he's going to control buying and selling, and basically, you know, we're almost there right now, right? And that you can't buy unless you have his mark. And yet God says that he's going to have his mark on the believers. So my question is, do you have his mark upon you? Is his tav on you? Ask yourself, do these things excite you or disturb you?